my hope is that the church can continue to be a place where that can hold the possibilities of transformation and spiritual connection that people are craving or
Mhm.
want to deepen, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And sometimes we don't have a name for that thing that we're looking for. Can we sit through the liminal space that is so undefined and allow ourselves to be?
Welcome to Flourishing Leadership in Tough Times, where we have honest conversations to help you stay rooted with integrity, rise with courage, and lead with hopeful resilience. Hosted by Deborah Owen. Welcome, friend. My guest today is the Reverend Dr. Georgia Thompson, the first woman and the first Black woman to serve as General Minister and President of the United Church of Christ. Elected in July of 2023, she brings to this role decades of leadership in justice, global ministries, and ecumenical work. She's a Jamaican immigrant, a poet, a pastor, and a powerful voice for unity and transformation. Before becoming the UCC's top leader, she guided the church's global partnerships, racial justice initiatives, and interfaith dialogues. Her journey is marked by courage, deep faith, and persistent hope in the face of adversity. And I'm thrilled to welcome her today to explore what it means to lead and to flourish in tough times. Welcome, Georgia. I'm so pleased to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Debbie. It's my
Yeah,
joy.
yeah. Good. Well, let's begin with the historic moment, if that's all right with you, when you were elected as the first woman and first Black woman to lead the UCC. You shared these words. Today, United Church of Christ, we created a first together. It won't be the last first, which I love. As I stand here before you as your newly and duly elected General Minister and President, I stand here as a Jamaican immigrant woman, a mother and a grandmother, a sister and a friend to many. The enormity of this moment will be with me for many years to come. You emphasized your roles, your family roles as mother, grandmother, sister, and friend. How do these personal connections influence your approach to leadership and community building? And how has that shaped the kind of leader you are, the kind of church you envision?
Yeah, I would say I'm very much about community. I think I have a sense of the interconnectedness. The Buddhists talk about the interconnectedness of all things, and I really appreciate that. And I think it's a way that we ought to think of ourselves, right? The Bible talks about that, right? We're all members of one body, and that too is about an interconnectedness and a oneness. And so I think the piece around community is important for me. So when I think of myself, as a mother, a sister, a friend, a grandmother, it's about the places that we occupy in community first, right?
Mhm, mhm.
When I walk out of my office, nobody sees me as Georgia Thompson, the General Minister and President of the United Church of Christ, right? They see me as a person first. And
Right.
those engagements and interactions, I think, come from a certain place. I think we're called to really love and care for each other in some deep, meaningful ways that I think are reflective of Jesus's commandment, right? To love our neighbor as ourselves. I was talking with one of the staff this morning, and I was kind of saying, asking about how were the children doing and that kind of thing. And I said, I worry because I am everybody's grandmother, right? I've arrived at that point in my life where I just see myself as like everybody's grandmother,
Yeah,
right? And so
yeah.
I want to know, like, how are people doing, right? I think the other part of it is that informs my leadership is this idea of the ways in which we arrive at the places that we are, whatever this moment is, right? We arrive in these places accompanied, right, by those who have gone before us in a variety of ways, whether that's an institutional understanding or a familial understanding or a community understanding, right? That I often experience myself as standing on the shoulders, right, of my ancestors, but also on so many the shoulders of so many women who have been a part of leadership in the church and have been denied access for various reasons. And a general synod in 2023, when I was elected, it was important for me to acknowledge Reverend Yvonne Delk and Reverend Dr. Barbara Brown Zygmunt, both of whom had been nominated as women to serve as general minister and president, but
Okay.
neither had been elected and
Yeah.
called. And so, in that moment, having both of them present for me was an acknowledgement that my election actually came on their shoulders and the perceived failures of the church to elect them in a different place and time.
I love that. In fact, I'd like to dive into that a little bit more if you don't mind. As I mentioned before we started recording, I've bounced back and forth between UCC and PCUSA, and I remember growing up in a Presbyterian church in northern New Jersey where we always had at least one female pastor. So it just never even occurred to me that it might not be possible for women to have such a leadership role in the church. And I live in New England now, and most of the churches here have women pastors, not all, but a vast majority of them. And yet I've come into contact over the last few years through some of my other online programs and education with a number of people who do not come from that tradition. And I'm curious, and the women who grow out of those churches where they're not allowed to be in real leadership roles, that's a tough time for them. Do you have opportunity to speak to women like that? And if so, what kinds of encouragement or hope could you offer for those women?
That's a yeah. I want to reframe your question
Sure.
a little bit with some comments. I think that we're still in a place where um, there's a glass ceiling in the church,
Hmm.
and that we still have a significant number of women who are serving in smaller churches
Correct.
or in bivocational ministry.
Hmm.
We still find that women do not necessarily have access to the larger pulpits,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So I just want to identify that, right? Um, I I think that there's this thing that says that we answer calling, right? Because I think sometimes if it were left to um, the social parameters and what we experience, many of us would not be in ministry, right? We would have walked away a long time ago, right?
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
think the first for me is, is there a sense of calling, right?
Hmm.
And what does that calling mean? And perhaps even what is that calling worth? I think that
Hmm.
there's a price that we pay for leadership, and it's unfortunate to say, but it is true, right? That um, as leaders, the price that we pay often outweighs the remuneration that we receive
Yes.
for the work
Okay.
that we do,
That
right?
exchange is not even.
Yes, it is not even.
Hmm.
And so I think that we especially as women, right? I think that we have to find ways to nurture and sustain ourselves, especially when we have a vision that seems to be long in coming. You know, um, I came out of a tradition before I got to the UCC. I came out of a tradition where women didn't even serve in leadership in the church. You know what I mean? It was this idea that women should be silent in the church, right?
Mm.
Um, and my years in the United Church of Christ have not necessarily been open and friendly. in terms of being a woman of color,
Mhm.
and even being a woman and what it means to be in certain spaces in the life of the church. Um, and I would say if there's a mantra that I continue to repeat for myself, because some days I'm just stunned that I'm even in this position, right? Like, how did I get here? I'm not quite sure. Um, that there's this thing that keeps saying to me, God is bigger,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that when we talk about God of the impossible, like I experience that as like a very real, like tangible way of understanding the divine and the movement of the spirit, that it may not always be easy. And yet I think that there are ways that we can do good, solid ministry.
Mm.
Um, if we allow ourselves to bloom where we are planted, right?
Mm. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, can we really find our way to being in the places where we are as we prepare ourselves for what comes next, rather than feeling that, this is not where I want to be right now. And then it's hard to do ministry because we're living in the next moment and not in the present moment.
That's powerful. So, and that could be applicable in so many
Yeah.
circumstances, not just this one, but the reminder that we do need to just be present in the moment and recognize that God's timing is not ours.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a
Yeah,
huge challenge,
it
right?
is.
I
It
think,
is.
yeah, it's a huge challenge.
That's good. Thank you for sharing that. That's really good. Hi, thank you for letting me interrupt this episode for just a moment. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, the chances are you care deeply about leading well, especially in times that feel heavy or uncertain or demanding. One of the convictions behind this podcast is that flourishing leadership doesn't start with strategy. It starts with who you're becoming as a leader, under pressure, in grief or sorrow, in change or transformation. And that's why I've been writing a series of devotional books called The Awaiting for Advent and When Sorrow Speaks for Lent. They're grounded in neuroscience, the personality patterns of the Enneagram, and reflective practice to help you grow in awareness, self honesty, and presence. And while they do follow the rhythms of the church year, they're really for any season when leadership feels costly. They're resources you can return to whenever you want to lead from the inside out. Not just do more or say more, but become more of who you were created to be, more grounded, more whole. So please see the show notes for links to these resources and share them with your friends. Thanks, and now back to this episode. Kind of during your tenure in this position, what challenges do you anticipate facing and what opportunities do you see for growth and transformation within the church and also within the communities where those churches reside?
Yeah. So I've been in this role for 2 years, and I've been on the national staff for 16 years.
Okay.
This is my fourth role
Okay.
in the national setting. And so it's like, moving around in a building, in a very tall building, right? And you get like different perspectives as you move, right?
Mm.
Because it doesn't stay the same, right? Your view becomes different. And so I think in the life of the church, um, we're not the church of 1957, and I think that 1957, of course, is our that part where the United Church of Christ was birthed out of, kind of the union of those other traditions, right?
Mhm.
We're not the church of 1957. And so, what does it mean for us to understand ourselves removed um, from maybe those models of ministry, that the way that we understood the church? The United Church of Christ will turn 70 in 2 years. right?
Wow. Yeah.
And we're looking forward to celebrating that 70th year.
Yep.
But I'm also putting before the church some identity questions. Who are we as a church? What do we see for the church of the 22nd century, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I keep reminding people we're like 25 years into, that's a quarter of the way through the 21st century. It's
Right.
kind of hard to be planning for a 21st century church when we're already living it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So really, it's about the vision of a future, right? It's about the now, but the, kind of what's next. I think also that we've somehow, I think, gotten stuck on the narratives of decline
Hmm.
rather than being able to really speak to where the church is flourishing
Hmm.
and the ways in which the church continues to evolve, right?
Hmm.
In 1957, I think those who came before us probably would not have imagined a moment where the church had to pivot to be responsive to something like COVID, right?
Right.
Fully online, with coffee hour and everything, right? Taking
Right.
communion virtually. You know what I mean? I think that the church was able to respond. And I think if we take a look at where we are and really think about what are the metrics that speak to vitality rather than using membership as a way of measuring what the church can do and the ways in which the church continues to be transformative, continues to hold a place for advocacy and justice, continues to minister to neighbors, continues to provide things like food pantries, supports food kitchens, is housing people, providing transitional housing for people who are re-entering from incarceration,
Hmm.
mentoring programs. I mean, elder care. I mean, it goes on and
The
on
list.
and on,
Yeah.
right? That we, I think, are really in the church doing ministry well beyond that 10 to 11 or 11 to noon or whatever it is, and whenever it is that we gather on Sundays, right? So
Hmm.
how do we begin to talk about vitality beyond the pews? And really look at the ways in which we're impacting community.
Hmm.
And also, I think through mission, impacting globally as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, for instance, our church has just started partnering and creating a community woodshed so that people can heat their homes this winter because there's going to be a lot of people who are not going to have access to the funding that they used to have access to
Yes,
because of the way things are changing.
yes,
And we have a major grant for intergenerational worship that we're now sharing with other churches in the area.
yeah,
So yeah, you're right that looking at that vitality and supporting each other
yes.
is so important. You mentioned COVID, and it makes me wonder what, so on an institutional level, what were you looking back at those transitions? What do you think were some of the elements that contributed to the UCC coming out on the other end of COVID and still being vital?
Yeah, I think it's really on a number of levels, right? And I think the um our congregations, I think many of them pivoted into the moment, right? We had pastors who became content creators, right? And
Right,
producers
right.
um,
Yeah.
for Sunday morning. I think that there are ways that conferences and even the national setting was also able, I think, to contribute into those spaces, whether it was by, we had moments where like sermons were shared with into like congregations they were able to use that or other kinds of content. So I
Okay.
think on the local level people were responsive and they were also able in the midst of that time to be able to provide pastoral care to really keep people together
Mhm.
in ways that were meaningful, touching bases with people. I remember a few times, I talked about this a little bit earlier, a few times that I did Sunday worship online, and was a little surprised that after worship there was coffee hour. You know what I mean? Kind of transitioning into a different room, where people were kind of chatting and, you know what I mean?
Right.
A little bit differently than worship. I think that was one thing. I think there was also the question about resourcing,
Hmm.
right? That whether it was food scarcity, the ways that communities had to pivot into burying the dead,
Mm.
providing pastoral care, dealing with elements of grief. I think
Mhm.
that we were able to support, and when I say we, I mean in the bigger sense, right? This was not like the national is doing this and the conference is doing this, you know what I mean? I think that there was really this element of solidarity, and we were all kind of in the same boat, figuring it out together. But I know we were also able in the national ministries to look at the resources that we had allocated for that program year, which would have been 2020, and really say, okay, we have these pools of money. We're not going to be traveling. We're not doing some of the things that we thought we were going to be doing. How
Mhm.
can these resources be used to
Mhm.
reimagine
Yeah,
attending to this moment? And so being able to do some of that, I think, was incredibly important. I think that there was just a different spirit,
hmm,
um, yeah, it was a different time. And I think that people really rose to the challenge. I think also, the COVID moment, gave us George Floyd's murder, right?
right,
And
right.
so, that was a huge and defining justice moment, I
Hmm.
think, as well, that really galvanized the global community, but
Hmm.
also the global church, right? From
Right.
an ecumenical standpoint. And so I think, place things like those, and there's so many other things that happen that cause us to have to really think about who we are as community, that I think it feels like in this moment we've lost some of that ability to kind of hold ourselves together, you know?
It does feel that way right now. It does
Yeah.
feel that way. So let me kind of shift a little bit then and ask you, um, for you personally, what helps you stay grounded and hopeful when things seem especially difficult?
I'm still leaning into that as a question, right?
Yeah.
And really, I think the question that I keep asking myself is what brings me joy? You
Yeah.
know, um, I I don't I don't have an answer some days, and some days I could find that.
Hmm.
I think for me, even as I'm living through this moment, I feel that I'm still grieving the loss of my parents, right? So my mother died in like 2018. She had dementia, right?
Hmm.
And it was such a slow process, right? There's nothing fast about it, but there's this thing where it feels like the losses are daily, right? You have this, you're losing something daily. People are losing their ability to remember. They lose this, and it's just this steady like moment of trying to grieve. And so when my
Hmm.
mother died, I couldn't figure out like how to grieve because the losses had been so incremental that
Yeah.
death didn't seem like a finality. It just felt like one more thing.
One more step.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And then 2 years later, my father died suddenly of
Mm.
COVID. And so these two things were in contrast, right?
Yeah.
Her kind of long death, and then this piece around him dying suddenly. And so I'm still trying to figure out like, how to recover,
Mm.
right? and then there was COVID and all these other things, right? And so I think in this moment, right, of like taking this on, I'm still asking that question of like, how to find joy in the daily living, especially when things can seem so overwhelming, right? Um,
Right.
I um, I think my spiritual practices are helpful. And there was a time when I could say this was my daily routine. You know what I mean? I don't have like routine anymore, right? But I think some of the things that do that for me are writing, and it's now, I think there was a time when I would sit and I could write poetry and that was life-giving. Now it feels like sometimes I'm turning out, like, uh, two keynotes and two sermons a week,
Hmm.
right? And so
Hmm.
finding life in that as well, both as creative expression, but also connection to spirit, right?
Hmm.
Because I feel like sometimes when I write, I feel like I'm channeling, right? Like I'm hearing, right? There's this spiritual thing about writing for me, right? In whatever form. And so I'm always really appreciative of the way in which spirit visits in this almost like magical, miraculous way around what is produced in a writing moment that is not just cerebral, but allows for connection to people that you've never met. And I'm always like overwhelmed when I preach and people come to me and say, "Oh, that's exactly what I needed to hear." Like that like blows my mind. I'm like, how's that possible, right? I've never met you. I don't know anything about you, but somehow this other thing happens. So I think I still like look at those kinds of moments with awe and wonder
Hmm.
and continue, I think, to also discover who God is in the midst of all of this, right? Who and what God is.
Hmm.
And so I think it's a combination of all those things that I think continue to like give me hope in this moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I was going to ask you about your poetry as
Yeah.
well, and it's I think that's really special that you say it's part of your connection with spirit, and through that writing, then it's God's spirit also connecting with other people, and it provides an opportunity for mutual flourishing.
Yes.
God is so good, right?
Amen.
Yeah,
All the time.
all
Yeah,
the
and it's
time.
a beautiful thing. It's just a beautiful thing to watch. And so I get a lot out of that. And I think when I think about the church, and you had kind of asked me this before, like when I think about the church and like my hope for the church, I want the church to be a place where people can find their way to deeper relationship with the divine, you
Hmm.
know, um, that there's whatever that means for a person. I believe that everything is not for everybody and that we have our own paths that we follow and somehow spirit kind of sifts through and guides us through whatever that looks like, right? And that is not a cookie cutter experience. And so my hope is that the church can continue to be a place where that can hold the possibilities of transformation and spiritual connection that people are craving or
Hmm.
want to deepen, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And sometimes we don't have a name for that thing that we're looking for. Can we sit through the liminal space that is so undefined and allow ourselves to be? Yeah.
I love the idea of the liminal space. I feel like so often, I feel like we're almost always constantly in some sort of a liminal space, because we're always becoming
Yes.
and we're never quite arriving. So we're constantly standing in the doorway
Hmm.
of who we are becoming, both individually and I suppose considering your position, we could say also as a larger institution, we're constantly in the doorway of who we are becoming.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. What does it mean? Well, actually, let me back up for a second. You had mentioned transformation. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about the role of transformation in flourishing,
Hmm.
especially through tough times. What's that role of transformation and flourishing?
Yeah, I think that a part of the human challenge with hard times is how to be responsive, right? And I think that when we find ourselves challenged, it pushes us out of um our comfort zone. Sometimes it's like at a glacial place, right? It's slow, right? And sometimes it just feels sudden, right? And so I think that the transformative part for me through those times is one, like what do we lean on? Like what's the go-to, right? In those moments that keeps us anchored in the midst of that kind of unmooring.
Right.
Um, and movement, however it is that we're experiencing that, right? But whatever it is, it moves us out of a place, right? And in order, I think for us to thrive and to flourish through those spaces, right? It's really about what are we willing to let go of in order to live into the moment that is present for us. And so often I think that we become entrenched in what makes us comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And then when those moments come, we want to hold on to the same way that we've always done things, right? But it's really, I think, in the letting go that we're able to learn something new about ourselves, that we're able to sit a little bit deeper into our skin, right? And maybe even also allow spirit to be present with us in ways that are comforting and guiding and also to get out of our heads, like we can be so cerebral, right, about we want to plan, we want to know how this thing is going to end. And I got to tell you, I'm one of those people. I've moved on to electronic books in my life, right? But I want to know how the book ends, right? And
Okay. So
so
do you jump to the end?
So I've been in the bookstore and I want to see, like, is this going to work out the way I think it's going to work out? Oh, okay, I can buy this book, right? So
Okay.
so I want to cheat to get to the end.
I love that actually.
Right? And I
Yeah.
think that sometimes we want to know what the outcomes are going to be, and we don't have that. Life doesn't give that to us, right?
No.
So I think it's being able to live into the mystery, both in the lowercase and uppercase M, right? The mystery of the things that we don't understand, and mystery as the divine,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
I think holds something that we don't understand, but perhaps guides.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. In fact, I just had a conversation with my spiritual director about trust and the whole idea of
Oh yeah.
recognizing that God is in charge and I'm not, and that's a gift actually, right?
Hmm.
And letting go, that invitation to surrender, that's so hard for us. We and this is the cerebral part, I think. We ache for control,
Yeah.
and that's what makes followers of Jesus different is because we recognize that we can let go of control and everybody else is desperate for control. And that's partly why they're not flourishing. I
Partner.
think.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think.
I think the tighter we hold on to what we think we know, the harder it is for spirit to be experienced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There needs to be space.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's good. That's good. Well, let's just let me kind of bring this back, we'll wrap up here, but what kind of encouragement or wisdom would you offer to someone who's listening or watching right now who feels stuck or weary or unsure how to move forward? What's the invitation to flourishing that you might be able to offer?
You know, be yourself.
Be yourself.
Yeah. I think sometimes we see people, we see things, and we want to aspire towards a thing, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. And we need to be able to afford ourselves love and grace because I think that integrity and authenticity are essential to flourishing, right? And that authentic part is something that only we can hold for ourselves, right? There are ways in which the world around us wants to push us into being what, places and things think we should be, right?
Hmm.
And it's not always what's best for us. So I think that personal discernment is important. That discernment that says, well, yes, I'm called to ministry, and this is the type of ministry that I want to go into, right? Or, you know, this is what brings me joy, right? And so this is what my spiritual practice is going to look like, I have this workshop that I do is poetry as a spiritual practice, right?
Mm,
As a spiritual practice. And it's really an entry point into conversation about what are the spiritual practices that nurture and sustain us, right?
okay. Okay.
And I had this conversation with somebody once who said, well, so we're talking about spiritual practices, who says, I can't meditate. I can't sit still, so I don't really have a spiritual practice. But I love gardening. And I was like, well, gardening is a spiritual practice.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, don't feel that you have to do what everybody else is doing. Like, find
Right.
what brings you joy. Find what nurtures your spirit. And I think it's that is spiritual, it's personal, it's professional. It's about all the things that make up our lives, right? If we can start with be yourself, right? And then fill in from there. Um, I think it gets us a lot further into that kind of thriving and
Hmm.
fulfillment that we need from day to day.
Yeah, yeah. And what that does is it honors the way God made us
Yes.
by recognizing what gives us joy. God's God put that in us.
Yes.
And it delights God to see that it delights us to do this thing that He created just for us. What a
Amen.
beautiful thought. Thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Well,
And if people would like to know more about you, where can they find that out?
well, you know, go to the Google.
Okay.
It's amazing. Occasionally I'm looking for my bio and I go to the computer and I type my name in and I'm always amazed at the things that pop up.
There you
So
go.
occasionally you could find like some of my poetry that has been published online that will pop up. My bio will pop up, all kinds of things,
That's great.
pictures of me over the years, itself a transformation. Um, so yeah, and social media
Thank you. All
also.
right. Thank you.
Yeah,
This has been a blessing. Thank you, Karen, Georgia. It's a pleasure to meet you.
absolutely. And thank you for the invitation to join you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for joining me on Flourishing Leadership in Tough Times. If you found today's conversation meaningful, please like and share this episode and subscribe for more honest, inspiring stories to help you stay rooted with integrity, rise with courage, and lead with hopeful resilience. If you have thoughts or questions, or you're interested in finding out about coaching, spiritual direction, or retreat leadership, I'd love to hear from you. Please reach out through Substack or find my website at insideoutministries.info. I'm Deborah Owen, and I'll see you next time.